So you want to write a fantasy book? Well, lucky for you, I've already done that. And it's going to take some work, but not actually as much as you think. That's a lie. It's going to take quite a bit of work, but it'll be worth it in the end, so it's fine.
Writing a book is a very daunting task for a lot of people, but there are a few steps that you need to follow before actually getting to writing, and I feel like once you followed those steps, the writing is pretty much the easiest part of the entire process, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. But let's just get right into it. Now, before I start giving advice and instructions for what it is that you need to do, I want to give a few disclaimers. Number one, this is mainly advice for fantasy books and fantasy writing because this is just the experience that I had because I wrote a fantasy book. Number two, again, another disclaimer, this is just my personal process and what worked for me personally. On a lot of videos I've watched on people giving advice, I found that my process has been just slightly more different than theirs. So you can please feel free to just ignore everything I say if you feel like it wouldn't work for you, but this is personally what I feel like got me the absolute best results. Let's get into it! I'm so excited, I love talking about this. Now, I say when writing a fantasy book, the first piece of advice that I would give anyone is figure out the world that you're writing in. I tried so many times to write so many different books and they failed every single time because while I had the characters in mind and while I had the plot in mind, I didn't really understand the world that I was writing them. I didn't understand where I was placing my characters. I didn't understand why they behaved in a certain way. You need to create a universe, a world, a country, a land where the world makes sense, especially if it's high fantasy and you're just inventing a completely brand new world. The world needs to make sense to you at the very least before it can make sense to anyone else. So what I did first was I had a brief idea of the characters I wanted, but before I even tried to create them and make them more complex, the very first thing I did was create my map. And how did I do that? So I'm just gonna stand back and show you. Oh, this is so fun! I'm so happy we're finally talking about this. Okay, let me take my phone from my mic. So the first thing that I did was I'm going to show you, but I stuck 4 pieces of A4 paper together. No, that's a lie. I used the back of a poster. I used the back of a One Direction poster that I had, and I flipped it over and I went into my garden and I got just a bunch of random pieces. So I got some Scrabble pieces, I got some dice, I got some chess pieces, just all different like ornaments that are very different sizes. And I sort of shook them in my hand and I shuffled them and I just like threw them onto the paper and I grabbed a pen and I traced around them and then I moved everything out and I sort of just looked at the world. I'm going to find an example video. If I can't find one, I'll just make one myself. But I looked into the world and I saw what I liked, didn't like what I saw. Something about it just didn't resonate with me, didn't sit right with me. So I got another one of my old posters that I didn't use anymore and I did it and I did it and I did it. And I kept going until I saw a world that sort of made sense according to the very brief story outline that I wanted. And I worked off of that. So in doing that, I got something that looked briefly not exactly like this. So something like that, where there was just like these random 3 worlds. They were a lot further to one another, but based on the plot line that I wanted, I moved them closer to each other. And this is, you can see, there is like barely any detail in this. Like nothing about this makes sense, even to me now that I know what the story is about. But I looked at it and it made sense to me. And this is on a bigger version. I had to throw that poster away, but this is a smaller version of the big one that I had. But I looked at it and it made sense to me and I started just sort of building my characters and my stories around that. So after that, after I had this like brief idea of what the world was and what the countries were and what the lands were, I tried to make it more detailed on a bigger piece of paper and I got this. So I now knew where the rivers were, the lands were, I had like my own keys, I knew what was north, what wasn't, and all these different lands. And as I did that, the story slowly started coming together for me and making more sense, but it still just didn't feel quite right just yet. And that's when I went on to the final sketch draft of my map, which looks like this. It's big, by the way. It looks like this. This is it. There's the details of the land, the continents, what is happening in each continent, so the lake, where the main character lives, etc. I've given them names. I've given all of like the oceanic routes, etc. I added in a few more continents. And mind you, believe me or not, this is still not the final product because I went on online software. I can't remember what it is, but I'm going to try and figure it out as I edit this video. And I created a digital version of this map. And as I did that and I started seeing what it would look like on a digital version, I got my final ideas. This is the second to last, this is the second to, what the hell is happening? This is the second to last draft that I had of my map, basically is what I'm saying. So once I had this figured out, every time I redrafted the map, I just understood my story a little bit more, and I understood my characters a little bit more, and then my characters became far more defined as people. Step 2 is once you've created this map and you have a brief idea of this world and you're having a very brief idea of your characters, before you move on whatsoever, I need you to understand the world. That means if there's different countries or different continents or different species and different groups of people, you need to understand the rules of all of these things. That doesn't mean it needs to be a perfectly honed encyclopedia of, why the hell did I pronounce it like that? Encyclopedia of, every single thing you need to know about this piece of land. I just mean there needs to be distinctive differences between each of them. And something I saw in an interview, I can't remember which author it was genuinely either R.R. Martin, Tolkien, or Sanderson. I honestly can't remember which one of them it was, but they were discussing the rules of fantasy world, and the difference between what's a pretty average or good fantasy book and what makes a great book is understanding the laws of magic, understanding the rules of magic. You can't just have someone who has like an infinite amount of magic and is never tired, is never worn out, is never this. Like, if you have a character whose magic is ice, you need to have this rule of like, if they use it too much, they end up getting cold themselves. Like stuff like this that just makes it more real, more detailed, that shows that you understand the world far more than just this brief idea of what it is. So I would really advise, it doesn't need to be too detailed. I would say for each country, each continent, or each city, just have 2 bullet points that makes them different to the other for your own personal benefit. This is like, readers will figure it out as you write the story, but when you do this before you write the story, it means that when you write each different scene or each different character, you know how to make these characters different, and it will help you infinitely in the long run. You have no idea. Now, I want you to take this piece of advice with the largest fistful of salt ever, because this truly is just what worked for me personally because of the struggles that I went through. I started writing my book on the computer. I started typing it, but in so doing, I discovered myself having the worst bouts of writer's block than I've ever had in my entire life. I simply could not write no matter what I did. And when I was thinking about it deeper, I figured out that it's because as I was typing, I consistently found myself trying to emulate, imitate, and mirror the writing style and the writing methods of some of my favorite authors, or just authors that were successful, even if I didn't like them. I just found myself keeping on trying to be like them and trying to write like them, and it wasn't working for me, and it didn't feel like myself, and that's why I physically couldn't get past the 4th or the 5th chapter. And when I did, I was struggling, and I hated everything about the way that it sounded. So what I did was handwrite the first draft of my book. You heard that right, brother. You heard that right. I handwrote the 500-page first draft of my novel because it's what worked for me. And honestly, I truly believe that if I hadn't taken this really genuinely, I mean it, physically painful step, I never would have finished this book. If I hadn't personally done this, I never would have finished this book because I simply could not figure out how to do it. So everything I'd already written in my typed up draft, I kept that in mind, but I scrapped it and I started from chapter 1. I just started it all over again. And let me tell you, by the time I got to chapter 4, chapter 5, so by the time I got past everything I had already typed up in my computer, I had a personal distinctive writing style. It worked for me. I realized as I was handwriting it, I realized, holy shit, this is who I am. This is the author I am. This is the writing style that I want. And I'm a poet. For anyone who doesn't know this about me, if you don't follow me on TikTok, Instagram, if you don't know me personally, I'm a poet. I've always been a poet. I wrote poetry before I wrote prose. And I discovered in handwriting that my prose emulated a lot of my poetry, not in a purple prose way, more in a this is very distinctly Celine way. Anyway, so as I was saying, I handwrote the first draft, and that worked perfectly for me because I feel like I find when I handwrite, I just sort of stream of consciousness and I go with like the craziest flow in the world, and it worked for me. And I managed to actually write this first draft, this 500-page first draft of my novel in, I think, 2 months. I also had the benefit, it was lockdown, I was unemployed, and I went on holiday I went to visit a family member of mine who lives abroad, and I stayed with them for about 5 weeks. So all I would do was write for hours every evening, and it worked, and I could not stop. Like, it was truly my saving grace. I think I really discovered who I was as a writer and what I wanted my story to be as I did this. And why it's such a good thing is because when you are a writer, the first draft is not going to be the final draft. The second draft, the third draft, the fourth draft, the fifth draft, the sixth draft, they are not going to be your final drafts, girl.
Take that from me. And if you think your second draft is your final draft, I promise you, it's not a good draft. And so the beauty of me handwriting this is that I had to go through and type out every single chapter onto my document, which meant that just typing it out was my second round of edits, which meant that I could completely rewrite things that I had said as though I'd written it for the first time. But because I've already handwritten it, because it's already so cemented in my brain, retyping it was truly fucking incredible. On the topic of the first draft, please, again, take this from me, but take this at face value because I mean it so wholeheartedly. Your first draft is gonna suck, okay? Your first draft is gonna be piss standing up. It's gonna be so bad. It's gonna be terrible. And you just have to make peace with it. I'm not joking when I tell you, I was reading through my first draft, handwritten, and there is a line in there that said, I released the breath I had been greedily inhaling. What the fuck? What the hell was that? What the hell was that? What the hell did I just read? That sentence! The breath I was greedily inhaling? Ah! That's so scary! That's so frightening! Don't ever write that shit again! So yeah, a detail I forgot to say is, my first draft is first person. My second draft that I was typing up after that first draft was third person. So not only was I completely rewriting, I was changing the perspective, which was absolutely incredible because in so how many times am I going to say in so doing in this video? In so doing, I was able to create an infinite amount more of characters and complexity to the other characters, you know? It wasn't the main character and then all of her friends and all the people around her and the way that she perceived them and her perception and her narrative. It was, this is her, this is him, this is him, this is her. And it was just, I feel like, to me personally, it really made the book 10 times better. So back to the topic of, your first draft is going to suck, and it's supposed to. Think of your first draft as, I don't know how to explain it. So, you know when you're trying on an outfit, right? And you're just sort of standing in the mirror and you want to put this top on, but you're in your boxer shorts. You know, you're in your dad's old boxers that you took as your own pajama bottoms, but you're wearing the top that you want to wear, and you've got two different pairs of shoes on because you're trying to see which one would look better with the top, even though you haven't figured the trousers out. And you've got no makeup on, but your hair is like half straightened, half curly, and you've got like gold jewelry on one hand and silver jewelry on the other. You look like a hot mess, bitch, but it will come together. You are supposed to look like vomit took form and stood up because you're supposed to clear the vomit and find the nutrients. I don't know where I was going with that. But that's basically initially my point. Your first draft is supposed to suck. It's supposed to be terrible because it's the stepping stone. That's why I say your first draft is not supposed to be your final draft and your second draft is not supposed to be your final draft. Your second draft is your first draft better. Your second draft is the draft you're supposed to work off of. My next piece of advice. We hear this a lot. We hear this in book reviews, we hear this in criticism, and we hear this in writing advice. Show, don't tell. I didn't have any idea what that meant when I first started writing until I read through my first draft. And I was like, oh, okay. The reason I cut 100 pages out of my book is because I was telling so much that could have been shown. I didn't need to tell the reader that this is her best friend and this is how he makes her feel and this is why they are such good friends and this is why their relationship works. I needed to show it to them. I think the greatest mistakes that we and other authors make is assuming that our readers are stupid and assuming that they need to be spoon-fed things. Even if you're writing a young adult book. Young adults are smart. They're not idiots. They don't need to be spoon-fed things. Especially mine is a young adult high fantasy, but it's for the higher cusp of young adults, so it's really 15 onwards. They're intelligent. Teenagers are far smarter than you think. You don't need to be spoon-feeding them everything. And once I figured that out, I was able to cut 100 pages out of my book. I didn't need to show you, I didn't need to tell you that she was upset. I didn't need to tell you that, oh, this character broke their leg and they were in pain. The character's leg broke, you heard it snap, you heard them scream, tears and snot fell down their face. That tells you they're in pain. Show, not tell is truly the difference between an okay book and a great book. That brings us on to purple prose. I used to hate this phrase because I just assumed it meant like don't have pretty writing, but I think it meant don't have writing that is so pretty it takes 3 pages to describe something that could have been described in a paragraph. That was really difficult for me because, like I said, I'm a poet. I want everything to be poetic. I want everything to be pretty and flowery and beautiful, but at what cost? You know, you want to make it pretty and flowery, write poetry. You want to make it beautiful and succinct, write a book. Bring the poetry in, but just don't Don't purple prose it, you know? Sometimes it's just a case of he was wearing a suit, it made him look good. You didn't need to say the material shifted over the slight bumps of his muscles and his hair fell over his face to frame it in this way. Midri shunu, blah, blah, blah. Oh, too much hake. I'm speaking Arabic now. Like, you don't need to do that, you know? Pick and choose when you want your writing to be pretty. Pick and choose when you want it to be frilly. But make sure that it's more poignant than it is pretty. Make sure that if you're going to make it pretty, it's pretty for a reason, not just because you're trying to show off that you can do pretty writing. And that's something that I struggled with and something that I really had to work my way around. Info dumping. Don't do it. That's what. Do not info dump. Do not info dump. There are so many ways that you can create this world and show it to your readers without info dumping, okay? A fantasy book, a high fantasy book, especially in a series, the first book is the world building. You don't need to info dump it. You don't need the first 10 pages, just paragraphs on paragraphs on paragraphs of the world and the system and the rules. In my book, you're still discovering things and details about the world and about the system on page 200 because it's fine. The important stuff has been told and it's been shown. It hasn't been told. It's been, this didn't work, and it's like, well, yeah, you remember this happened, Midrishino, I'm speaking Arabic again. It happens, you know. World building needs to be effortless. It needs to be seamless. It needs to be threaded into the story in a way that sort of doesn't feel like it's been there. Next step. So we've written the first draft. We've written the second draft. We've edited it. We've done the third draft. We've done the fourth draft. Midrishunu, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we understand. We're moving on. What I did, I printed out a hard copy. And I didn't even have a name for my book, by the way. I would say, I don't think that you need to pay attention on creating a name for your book. The name will come to you in due course. My name came to me a year after I wrote the book. I couldn't decide on a name. It came to me a year later when I was like, holy shit, I think that's kind of a smart name. So it was manuscript. It was literally, the name of it was manuscript for a good year. Anyway, I printed out a hard copy. And I bound it and I made it A5 so it was shaped like a book. I had my map printed and then I went through and I read the book. I read it like I was reading a book and I did all of my annotations. I cut out what I wanted to, you can't see, I don't know why I keep showing you, but I had my red pen, I had my blue pen, I had my highlights, and I read through it. I cut out what I wanted to cut out. I highlighted chapters that I thought were important. And I did this thing where is it? You'll see here, I just added like a little circle to the top corner of this chapter. The reason that I did that is because I figured out that between this chapter and the one that came before it, I wanted to add in a quiet chapter. What is a quiet chapter? A quiet chapter in a book and a novel is moments within the book that give you insight into who the characters are, give you insights into their relationships, just makes you connect deeper with these characters so that you understand them better and you love them better. It's a quiet chapter because nothing relevant to the wider plot and the wider action of the story is happening, but it is still an important detail. I have quite a few chapters in my book, and I don't know if I'd ever be willing to get away from them because I feel like without these chapters, you wouldn't have understood a lot of the friendship dynamics, a lot of the familial dynamics, a lot of the interpersonal struggles and complexities. So that circle there is as I'm reading the book, and I think I could fit a 2 or 3 page quiet chapter in here. I would do stuff like that. But yeah, I would really advise printing it out in the shape of a book so that you can read through it as though you were reading a book and underline things that you needed to be edited. Next step after that, I have the absolute incredible privilege of having reader friends because I'm within the reader community. So I sent copies to my friends and my friends read through it. And one thing about my friends, they're real as fuck, okay? They're not just going to tell me a book is good because I'm their friend and they want me to be happy. If there's something wrong with a book, they're going to tell me there's something wrong with the book. So I sent it to a few of my reader friends and they all came back to me with feedback. This is the only friend that sent me back hard physical feedback and I loved it, but a few of my friends sent me email feedbacks. One of my friends, Sahar, she actually studied, like one of her modules at university was copywriting and book editing and grammar, etc. So we had a good 2-hour long FaceTime call where she highlighted every single thing that she thought was constructive criticism and she thought needed to be amended in that book. So it brings me on to the piece of advice, which is ask people to read it and be willing to accept criticism. Some criticism might not be constructive. Some criticism might just be criticism. If you really plan on being a published author, if you really plan on being any type of public figure where your work and your life's work is given to the public, you need to learn how to take things on the chin. You need to learn how to develop a thicker skin because you will never improve if you don't. You will never improve if you can't accept criticism. This is my greatest piece of advice. If you don't have reader friends, or you don't have friends who know how to criticize literature, go on websites like Fiverr. Go on websites like, I can't think of any more websites, but websites where people get paid to read through and give constructive criticism for your manuscript, because you're gonna need it, girl. And you know what? If you don't have a friend that you want to discuss it with, sit in front of your mirror and do it. Who's gonna call you crazy? Your reflection? I do that all the time anyway. Was that English? So, there are now 2 ways you can go. If your book is a standalone fantasy, I would advise, you've had this advice, you've gone back and forth, you've added all the details, you've removed them, you've done your final draft, I would then say start writing your query letter. However, this book is part of a series, so what I did, after I did all of these edits and added and removed la-di-da-di-da, midri shunu, kullu haki, kullu jadane, blah, 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 I got myself another notebook. And you guessed it, I went through another round of edits for my book. Not because I wanted to change anything, but because I wanted to go through it and make sure that there was a list of details. I don't know if you can see them. There was a list of details that I could remember. Because this is a series, it means I don't want to lose any important details from this book and forget about them in the next book and then be criticized for plot holes just because I forgot about these. Or I don't want to forget a certain side character who wasn't that important's name just because they're still a human being within the story and they matter to other characters. I don't want to forget how this one particular character looked in this moment. I don't want to forget that this person actually cut their hair. So I went through it. I went through all of the details that I wanted to remember. I did this after my 7th round of edits. And then I did 2 more rounds of edits. Yay me! So I am going to, here they are. I printed out that final round of edits that I did on a 410 pages, all of it here. And I am now on that final step again, because although I already did it, I need to do it again because I added more details and I removed more things. So I am now going to have to go through this final printed, fuck, it's really heavy. I have to go through this final printed version, and I've got my color-coded highlighters, and I'm going to highlight details to remember, details to develop in the next book, character traits to remember, i.e. their behavioral traits, their personality traits, things they like, things they don't like, and the way that they look. And there was another thing, but I can't remember what that is. That is my advice for everything that you need to do before writing your query letter and sending them out. I would love to give you advice on query letters, but I'm still seeking those out for myself. This is my advice for writing a book, and I wish you the best of luck, and I would love to read whatever it is that you do write if you follow my advice. And genuinely, truly, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I do not lie when I say this. If you need advice, or you need someone to talk to, or you need help with a certain thing, or you just have an additional question that I didn't cover in this video, leave it down in the comments below or DM me. I'm bookishwithb_ on Instagram, and I'm bookishwithb on TikTok, and I'm Selena's Talking on YouTube. So feel free to message me, to DM me, to comment under this video. Just let me know if there's anything I didn't say that you need help with. I am always happy to help. And I love you guys. Bye. Good luck.